This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
As Beis Hashem, we're working on the sugyas, the weeks of Sheitovim. So the famous Maisa that one of the Rebbes that told the Sahara Rebbe used to say was as follows. And he said that a person can come to Shemayim after 120 years, Beis Hashem, of living on this world and living Torah and mitzvahs. A person can come to Shemayim and say to the Rabbi Shalom, give me my reward. Let's see what's going on. Give me my schar for my limud Torah. Give me my schar for my shmiras ha-mitzvahs. B'choli. And unfortunately, sometimes the scene goes a little bit different. You have two sides of the scale. And on one side of the scale is the mitzvahs. On the other side of the scale is the aveiros. And unfortunately, in many situations is, that the scale, the side of the scale that has the actual aveiros gets weighed down and down and down and down. And a person is watching the scale and he's thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? Where is that mitzvah going to come to weigh the other side? Until at one moment, so the Rebbe continued to say over the Maisa, at one moment, there was a bus, huge bus, and this bus was packed with people. It was jam-packed with men, women and children. And the moment this bus comes along and puts itself on the side of the scale that is full of mitzvahs. And then immediately takes the scale, completely crashing into the floor, overweighing the other side of the aveiros. And the person there is watching and he's thinking, where did this bus come from? I never saw the bus, I never saw the people in the bus. What's going on? So they tell him in Shemayim, I'll tell you what happened. There was an Arab, Chmon al-Islam, no such a thing. An Arab was planning on making a bomb and putting it on the bus. And he was there somewhere in East Jerusalem with all the wires and everything was coming together and he was getting it this way and that way, preparing for this terrible fate. And at that moment, you walked on the street and you saw in the corner of your eye something very small that you should not be continuing to look at. And you immediately averted your eyes away from that look. I'm not looking at that. And you stopped. And at that exact moment, when the Arab was going to set this bomb into motion and put it onto the bus, the bomb exploded in his face. And he died at that moment. Zut in Shemayim, that entire bus that is standing right now on the scales that tipped over your mitzvahs more than the aveiros was the schar that you got by not looking that caused all these men, women and children to become saved and to be alive today, and their children and their grandchildren for all future generations. For what? For one look. That's all it was. And the Rebbe said this, and we know this is so, but we saw Salanter and others as well, and that is that a person can do a Maisa, a small little Maisa that he thinks to himself, what is it already? A small little thing, I turned my eye away from looking at something I shouldn't have done. And the reward that he gets is unimaginable. It's just amazing. It's just amazing and unbelievable. So a person, Beis Hashem, as we're working on doing these weeks of Sheitovim, should take this into consideration. It's not a small thing. And as we're going to explain Beis Hashem today, is that the inyanim are tremendous. Chazal are telling us tremendous ideas of what's going on behind Istakhlus, Shmiras Einayim, the benefits of Shmiras Einayim for our own lives, which Beis Hashem will discuss. Let's continue. There's a Torah, there's a Shulchan Aruch in Even HaEzer Siman Kav Halacha. And the Torah tells us as follows. The Shulchan Aruch tells us, Soich ha'odom, le'israchet ma'anoshim ma'oid. Break the Bach. What's going on? Where do we find such a case where the Chazal, where the Torah, where the Shulchan Aruch tells us ma'oid? Very, very few times. And here's one of them. To distance a person, to distance yourself from noshim, which obviously means not in a marriageable form, but in someone you're not married, you're intending to marry. So you have to separate yourself from them. What's the chance of the Bach? I'll tell you why. Because arayis is something that a person desires more than any other desire. And this is a double poshet. If you take electricity, take for a moment a current of electricity, And you take the power of how much electricity can have the koyach to give strength to light up New York City. The koyach of such electricity is unreal. But on the other side of the fence, the amount of damage that can do is tremendous. If a person were to touch that electrical field, that electrical wire, that can light up a New York City, can you imagine the damage it can do also? The Rebbeinu Shalom wanted the world to continue. The only way for the world to continue is for men to have a taiva for noshim. Otherwise you'll never get married. You'll never have kids. So the men of the Rebbeinu Shalom made the strength, the koyach so strong that it causes a person to get married and have children. But if the strength is so strong, look at the damage it can do also. And the damage is unbelievable. Chazal are telling us over here that Ukas HaBosim writes that one of the things, and there's only very few of them that Chazal tell us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates is arayis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates arayis in a way that is obviously in an Issa way, not in a Mutter way. The Aruch HaSadikim, as we know, writes that every midah that a person has, sometimes you need a little bit of midah. Sometimes, for example, a person needs a little bit of gaiva. No, sometimes a person has to be not a bal gaiva, but you need a little bit of gaiva in order to go far in life. You need a little bit. It's like a spice, he says. He says that just like a spice in a chicken soup, in a piece of chicken, meat, whatever it may be, you need a little bit of spice. Too much, not good. Too little, not good. You need it in between. You need a medium. You need somewhere along the lines in the middle. So he writes many midas are that way. Many midas cast. Sometimes you need to have a little bit of anger, depending on what the situation is. Sometimes you need this, sometimes you need that. When it comes to something like gaiva, and it comes to noshim, absolutely nothing. When it comes to the midah of women, a person has to be completely clean. The slate has to be clear without anything whatsoever. The chinuch tells us in Mitzvah Kuf Bei Ches, says the chinuch, that a person has to realize, and people often say this to themselves, I'll look and nothing will happen. Right? It's like that famous thing we always say so many times, right? It's like a museum. Look, but don't touch. Look, but don't touch. Don't do anything. But look, what's the Yisra anyway? What's the Yisra? Zog the chinuch, people say to themselves, I'll look, and nothing will happen. Zog the chinuch has the shalom shaharba omru cave in it shop. So many people said the same thing, but they were mixture in this halacha. And in the end, they stumbled and they fell by a person saying, don't worry, you can be trusting on me, I'll be okay, I can look, and nothing will go further than that. A person has to realize that it's not that way. But it goes deeper than that. There's a Moedik Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Dalet Halacha Dalet, says the Rambam, there are 5 things. I said, listen to the secret. You should have to know this. You carry this in your pocket for the rest of your lives. And the next time you go onto the street, you have this in mind. He said this previously. That before, there was a famous marshal, there was a person inside a pit, and he couldn't get out. And someone went past the pit and said to him, why didn't you just go home and get a ladder, this way you'll be able to get out? What's the yisoid? The Baal Shem Tov, the pshat is poshet. The pshat is the yisoid of how to stop yourself from falling is before you fall, work on it. If a person listens to this Rambam, this is one of the most hair-raising Rambams you'll ever hear. It's to make your hair stand on its end. It's just unbelievable. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Dalet, there are 5 things that a person won't do tshuva. Why? Because a person doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. A person can only do tshuva if he sees that there's something wrong. Zuk the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva. There are 5 things that you don't even think you're doing anything wrong. Mimela, says the Rambam, if you don't think you're doing anything wrong, says the Rambam, you'll never do tshuva. That's scary. Says the Rambam, there are 5. Number 3 on the list is, says the Rambam, Hamistakel Barayis. Mala al Daitoi, says the Rambam, She'ein Bekach Klum. Says the Rambam knew this. That when a person looks at a woman in a way that he shouldn't be looking, what do we think we're doing? No, big deal. Look but don't touch. Famous museum, right? What did I do already? I just looked. Nothing happened to the Maisa. Aber so the Rambam, this is an instant scholar for a person to not do tshuva. Because if you don't realize what you've done wrong, you're not going to do tshuva. Come Elul, come Rosh Hashanah, come Yom Kippur. It's about holding by the Eilah. He doesn't even realize he did anything wrong. He goes to a whole Elul, he goes to Rosh Hashanah, he goes to Yom Kippur. But so the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, you never thought you did anything wrong. Because what's looking anyway? Rabbi said tonight is what we're going to explain. How looking is maybe even worse than anything else, as we'll explain Be'ez Hashem. We know the Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma Chav Tesla and Aleph tells us, we explained this previously, that when a person looks at something, it's worse than the Meiser itself. The imagination, Chazal explained, as the Mephoshim explained in the Gemara, that the imagination builds and builds and builds to something that we start thinking this way and that way. The Meiser is the Meiser. But looking puts a person into a situation that imagination takes over. And when imagination takes over, all of a sudden, there's no limit. There's no limit to what could happen, what should happen, what it will look like, what it doesn't look. It's unbelievable. And Chazal knew this. And that is the reason why they explain that looking is so chom. There's a Mordechai Gemara. The Gemara tells us like this. Let's we'll start with the Posek. The Posek tells us in the Midbar Perek as well. Obviously, this is one of the Mekayos in the Torah that a person shouldn't go after his lave and after his einayim, his eyes and his heart. A person should be very, very careful. Right? Now let's put that in the Gemara. In Brachos Yud Beis. What's the pshat? Because the heart and the eyes are the legs of the body. The eye sees and the heart wants. That's what Chazal tell us. And the Chinuch in Mitzvah Shin Pei Zayin tells us that the shorish of this mitzvah is hidden. Because if a person is careful from this mitzvah, the Chinuch, I'm telling you what Rosh of the Chinuch. The Chinuch writes that if a person is careful in Stakis Ba'arayis, it stops every other Aveira. Rosh of the Chinuch, Rabbi Yisai. Tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And people often think it's a gzeira. Like it's a border, like it's like a fence. Don't do this because of something else. It's nishta. You know what it's like? They're medamit to salty water. What's salty water? If a person is very, very thirsty, and you take a cup of very salty water, and you start drinking it, for the first few moments that the water goes down your throat, you feel a little bit quenched. You were thirsty. The liquid goes down your throat, you feel a bit quenched, and then the salt kicks in, and you realize, oh no, this is really salty. And there's only one way to continue. There's only one way to get rid of the salt, is to keep on going and keep on going and keep on going. You keep on drinking the salty water. So Chazal, it's the same thing over here by Stakis Ba'arayis. It seems like there's imagination. There's something promising you. The eye is telling you, the eye, by the way, is the best salesman in the world. The eye is telling you there's something out there for you. There's something vital, there's something further this can take you. And you look at it, and on that moment you taste the salt, and it shows in its emptiness. There's nothing there, lemaisa, tangible, that I can take a hold of. And the only way to continue is just to go and go and go. And once you start, about we all know that a person can't stop. It's like a balloon. You fill up more and more and more and more air. But eventually it just pops. It just cracks and the whole thing bursts. That's the Metzias. Chazal in the Gemara in Yuma telling us that a person has to realize that looking at something is worse than the Aveira because the imagination takes a person. This is Hollywood. Hollywood takes a person to all, they'll have a scene there, and it will show you until a certain point, and then it stops. Because it wants your imagination to take over. And when your imagination takes over, that's the most dangerous thing that can ever be. Because at that moment, the sky's the limit. And that's what they want. There's a very interesting inyan as well in this halacha, in this inyan of Shmir Sinai, and that's as follows. A person has to realize that an eye is a connection with his neshama. As we'll see in a moment, Chazal, Mesilas Yesharim tell us, for example, in Perek Aleph, Mesilas Yesharim, that a person can do znus with his guf, a person can do znus with his einayim as well. Nil beinayim, a person can do a ma'aseh znus with his einayim, because an eye is the connection. The eye connects the neshama. When you see something, it goes into your guf, and it goes inside, and you get connected to that thing. I want to explain that to you also in a certain way for this. People often think, I looked at something. Let's go weiter. Let's continue like, I looked at it, that was last night, that was earlier this afternoon. No, now we'll start afresh. Oh, but what they don't realize is, if you don't misakin your eye, if you don't fix up this problem, it always stays there. I want to tell you one of the scariest Gemaras I think I ever read. The Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, says the Gemara that if a person is a choyle, Rahman al-Islam, so the Gemara, if a person is a choyle, the Malach HaMoves is standing on top of him. When a person is holding by Misa, Rahman al-Islam aleinu, if a person is holding by Misa, the Malach HaMoves is standing on top of him. And the Gemara tells us that the Malach HaMoves is Mole Einayim. It's full of eyes. Full of eyes. So Chazal, you see on top of you a creation of, I don't know what it looks like, but there's thousands and thousands of eyes. And that's all you see. And that's the end of the Gemara. There's a Moedik Chsam Sofer. The Chsam Sofer brings his Rebbe, Reb Nosson Adler, that he says like this. He says when a person sees something that's awesome, when a person looks at something he shouldn't have been looking at, every time he looks, he creates one of those eyes in the Malach HaMoves. That's what he does. Every single time you look, you're creating another eye in the Malach HaMoves. That's what the Chsam Sofer's Rebbe said. And he said when a person is a choyle, and he sees this creation with all the eyes, his entire body shakes. Because he knows that they came from him. He knows that every single one of these eyes came from him. So a person thinks to himself, no, wait, Beseda, I looked, that was a week ago, a month ago, whatever it is. About Peter's Gemara, Peter Pshat of the Rebbe, of the Chsam Sofer of Nosson Adler. A person creates the eyes remain there. Unless a person does tshuva, unless a person fixes up what he did wrong, those eyes are going to remain on the Malach HaMoves for how many years, I don't know. And I want to bring this in an even clearer way. There's an unbelievable Gemara. The Gemara in Kedushin Daf Pei Amud Aleph. Everybody knows this Gemara. The Gemara in Kedushin Daf Pei brings that there were certain Tanoim that used to laugh at people for doing certain aveiros. And the Pasha used to laugh at them for doing aveiros of arayas, looking at the wrong things, being Isaac and Noshim, whatever it was. And these Tanoim were laughing as if to say, what are you doing? Like, don't do it. What are you Isaac in? He used to laugh and says, come on, such an easy thing, why don't you just not do it? And in Shemayim it caused a stir. And in Shemayim it said, why are they laughing at them? It's not such an easy thing. And Chazal tell us that what happened is the Malach HaMoves said, I want to test them. Let's test these Tanoim and let's see if they really got good stock. If they can also manage to refrain from such an aveira. And Chazal tell us an unbelievable thing. Chazal say that the Sultan, the Malach HaMoves, dressed up as the most beautiful woman that had ever been created in the universe. And this Malach HaMoves dressed up as this most beautiful woman and came down into this world and presented himself to this Tanoim to try and test them. And they saw and they looked away and they came a different direction and they saw and they looked that way and they kept on averting it. And eventually they overpowered and they were strong. And the Chazal tell us that in the Chanami in the Shemayim they said to the Sultan, stop, Adkan, that's enough. We see that they're okay. We see that they withstood this terrible, terrible trial. They said this terrible Messiah. Fred the Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai asked the Moedik Kasha. If the pshat is that these people, that the Sultan of Malach HaMoves wanted to dress up as the most beautiful woman, why did he dress up as the most beautiful woman? Why did he send the most beautiful woman? Why did he dress up? So the Ben Ish Chai is such a powerful Yesod. Says the Ben Ish Chai, because if they would have sent a real woman, they would have looked even for one moment. And for that one moment there would have been a connection. And it's not worth to cause them to have this connection. Rather let the Sultan dress up, let the Malach HaMoves dress up as a beautiful woman in a way that it won't be a connection. Rabbi Yisrael, we're seeing from here a tremendous thing. Until now, many people look at, Histakbus B'noshim Shmiras Einayim as a nice thing to work on. Oh, but Rabbi Yisrael, we see from here something very, very clear. That when a person looks at something he shouldn't, it's not a matter of an aveira, avada it is, but it goes deeper. There's a connection that happens when a person looks at something. The connection is made. If you don't get rid of this connection, it's always going to be there. And the person, mamash, has to work on that. The person has to realize how chomer it is and how serious of the avera we're dealing with. The person has to realize something else as well, and that is that life is full of many challenges. Life presents its own challenges. Everybody has a difficult life in certain areas. Some people this way, everyone is nisayis in this direction, in that direction. Everybody's got their measure of nisayis. It's like a football team. If a person is on a football team, so the coach, any good coach, will make sure he challenges his members of the team in a good way. So every so often he throws them a good test. Do this, do this, do this. Is he doing it for their bad, or is he doing it for? He's doing it for their benefit. And therefore, Rabbi Side, the big coach in Shamayim, every so often sends us certain tests. And if we pass those tests, they're for our good. The Rabbi Shalom sends tests to us to make us a better person. And it's actually brought down in Chazal that if a person feels that he gets tested more than a regular person, it's difficult for him. He should realize it's because the Rabbi Shalom loves him and wants to fix him up in the best possible way, and that's why the Rebbeinu Shalom sends a person tremendous nisayos. There's two ways that a person can look at a nisayos. Either he can take it head on and challenge, or he can give up. So many people give up. And what they do is, one will drink, one will take other substances, some will look at pictures they shouldn't buy. Why? Because it soothes them. It makes them feel bishmak. It makes them feel good. In a difficult life, in a difficult world, it's so easy to take a few moments of pleasure, what you think is pleasure, to soothe yourself. Because that's all it does. And that's all it lasts for. No longer than that. And we all know that after those few moments, it's over, and the emptiness sinks in, and that you say. The person has to realize, life is tough, life is difficult. The best way is to go with it head on, not to give up. Not for looking at different ways to soothe yourself. And a person has to realize over here as well, there's a moedik schar and reward for a person on working on Shnei Sinayim. The Mesechtes Derech Eretz tells us as follows. Zug the Mesechtes Derech Eretz kol haroyah do be'erva ve'eina zones einov mimeno zoicha mekabel b'nei hashchina. Says the Mesechtes Derech Eretz, if a person sees something and he turns away his sight, his eyes, and he doesn't get any pleasure and hana from that, he's zoicha to mekabel the pnei of the shchina. What that reward means. There's a moedik orchas chaim laharosh. One of the Rishonim. The Rosh writes that when a person comes to tefillah, he should get rid of all his machshavas and all of his things that he saw. And the Rosh says, v'rosh kol hadvarim, the most important thing, if a person wants to have his tefillah answered, is sheshoyme es einov mikol dova she'ena shaloi. The Rosh is telling us, how many of us want our davening to be niskaven in Shamayim? We daven a shachris, a mincha, and a ma'ariv, we don't feel we're being answered. So the Rosh, the key is right here. The key is if a person is careful to watch his eyes, and a person is careful not to look at things that don't belong to him. In a Lashon Noki, the Rosh was talking, obviously. Then a person is zoicha to have his tefillahs answered in a tremendous, tremendous way. Rabbi Say, there was a tremendous tzaddik that went to a certain place, and to go to a certain place, he had to enter, he had to go through a place of tumah, a place of non-tznius. And he had to go through it, that was the Metzias, there was no other way of getting there, he had to go through. And he went through the certain place, and he got to the place that he had to get to, and he davened the mincha. And he said afterwards, he had never experienced such a mincha in his life. The kedusha that he felt in such a mincha, he couldn't believe it after going to a makom of tumah. What's the pshat? How did he have such a kedusha in a mincha after going through such a makom kodesh? So the pshat is like this, Rabbi Say. I heard a pshat once from a certain Rosh Yeshiva. So he wanted a tiny like this. He went to his Rebbe. This fellow went to his Rebbe and asked his Rebbe, what's the pshat? His Rebbe said to him like this. Rabbi said, listen, this is very scary. The Rebbe told him that in a place of tumah, in a place where there's no tznius, in a place where it's a place of aveirus, so all the people that pass through there, that unfortunately looked where they shouldn't have been looking, left at that place so many koiches of kedusha. Therefore, when a person goes to that place and he doesn't look, he has the siyata d'shmaya to chop all the koiches of kedusha that were left there, takes them as his own, and the minute you went to that mincha, you're on a higher level than you ever have been. You experience a different level of kedusha because you're in a place that has the non-sneers, has the tumah, and you didn't look. You get to keep all the schar, all the koiches of kedusha of all the other people that didn't manage to go through it the same way you did. A Yid in Yerushalayim from America, when he was here, he once went to visit Rabbi Yaakov Beis Dovid, and he asked him, he said to him, give me a bracha, I'm going back to America. So Rabbi Shachta said to him, going to America, be careful of the airport. Because in the airport is the time, it's the situation where they try to get you in all sorts of maris asuras, all sorts of things that a person shouldn't be looking at. And at that time in the airport, a person can have the siyata d'shmaya to chap the koiches hakedusha that he never got before. That a person has to realize when you go through a place of tumah and you don't look, the kedusha that you can get in such a tremendous way. And he wanted to say the most amazing pshat. There's a famous Shem Shmuel. The Shem Shmuel says pshat in the Zohar. That the Zohar says that it's shayach for a person to become a tzaddik, gomor, berega achas. Lashon of the Zohar Kodesh. The Zohar Kodesh writes a person become a tzaddik, gomor, berega achas. How, may I ask you, can a person become a tzaddik, gomor, berega achas? One moment. So the Shem Shmuel explains pshat like this. Moyudik. So the Shem Shmuel. There's two ways a person can become a tzaddik. Way number one is the long way. You sit and you have on your meters. You sit and learn Yom V'Layla. You mamish work on your tefillah. Everything like that. You work on your machshava. Then you eventually become a tzaddik. It may take many, many years. It may take a lot of hard work. But eventually you get there. Said the Shem Shmuel, option number two is much easier and much quicker. Simple. Says the Shem Shmuel, if you go into a place, if you go to a mokoy, a situation where there's so much tumah and there's so much bad, and a person turns away from that tumah, a person looks away from the side he shouldn't be looking at that moment you get the kedusha equal to all the tumah that's around you. The koyach of the tumah, imagine if a person is on the internet, how much koyach of tumah was put into that. How many thousands of millions of hours and dollars were put into the internet of tumah to make a person look at the wrong thing. When a person turns away from that site, so the Shem Shmuel, you become a tzaddik gomor overnight. Because at that moment, you've just got all the kedusha based on the exact amount of tumah that's in that mokoim. You get the kedusha as well. And therefore, the opportunity is out there. The opportunity for us, Rabbi Yisai, we learned from the Rosh that if a person wants his tefillah to be miskabel, if a person wants to have a kedusha, a person wants to appreciate his marriage, we've discussed this previously, last time, and we'll discuss it next time as well, that a person has to realize Shmir Seinayin is not just another Aveira that a person has to be careful. This is what makes the connection inside your guf, which goes inside your neshama. And everybody knows an expensive china set, once you crack it, once there's a chip in the corner over there, that chip is never replaceable. That chip is never fixable. The chip is always there. And no person wants to live his life with that chip set of china in his house. And therefore, Rabbi said we have to realize the connection that the eye makes inside the guf, inside the neshama, is a connection that is everlasting unless a person, of course, does tshuva, then everything goes back to being normal again, as we'll learn Be'ez Hashem and Equals Tshuva. Tomorrow, Rabbi Yisai will go right in the Inyan and we'll discuss how can a person bring himself up and overcome the challenges. Be'ez Hashem tomorrow night.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.